The truth doesn't set you free until you're brave enough to face it. I stand before the congregation, my heart pounding as I feel their eyes on me. The weight of the past presses heavily, but my voice remains steady as I begin my testimony. The truth that has been buried for so long now demands to be spoken. I take a breath, my hands trembling slightly, but the words come easily, like they've been waiting for years to be released. I once dedicated my life to the church. I gave everything, my time, my energy, my soul, to what I believed was a path of purity and faith. As I speak, I'm taken back to another time, another place, years before this gathering, when the world felt so much simpler, so much clearer. I was a little girl barely old enough to understand the full meaning of faith, but I knew one thing: I had a calling. It wasn't something I'd ever been told, but rather something that whispered in my heart every time I prayed. It was the steady, unwavering pull that led me to the convent when I was just 18. I wanted to live a life of service, to be the embodiment of devotion. It felt like the only purpose worth pursuing. My family was proud, their eyes glistening with admiration as they sent me off to the convent. To them, I was a symbol of what faith should look like. A girl who would dedicate her life to God and the church, leaving behind the distractions of the world. Everyone around me believed it was the right path. But I couldn't have known then that my path would soon be filled with shadows, hidden behind the sacred walls I'd once thought were impenetrable. I pause for a moment in my recounting, my gaze sweeping over the crowd. What I am about to tell you is something I never thought I would share, but I've learned that to be free, you must speak the truth. If you're watching this today, please stay with me. The journey I'm about to unfold isn't just mine. It's for anyone who's ever felt trapped by the very thing they believed would save them. A brief moment of silence hangs in the air before I continue. Like and subscribe if you believe in the power of truth, and share this story. The world needs to hear it. The first few months in the convent were filled with what I'd expected: prayer, silence, and the comfort of like-minded souls. I was surrounded by women who shared the same vision, the same commitment. I thought I'd found peace, that I'd found my true calling. But the deeper I went, the more I began to feel something wasn't right. The rules that bound us felt like chains, and the promises of compassion seemed hollow in the face of the harsh, sometimes cruel discipline imposed by those at the top. I was young, eager, and willing to serve, but little did I know that my service would come at a cost I wasn't prepared to pay. I remember the first time I saw the cracks, when the truth about the convent's leadership began to slowly seep through. At first, it was small things, quiet whispers, moments that seemed insignificant at the time. But soon, the whispers grew louder. The faith I had once embraced wholeheartedly began to splinter, and that's when I knew I had to make a choice. I remember the first time I set foot inside the convent. It felt like walking into a different world, one filled with peace, silence, and the soft glow of candlelight. The air was thick with incense, and the hum of prayer filled the space, creating a sense of serenity I had never known. I had dreamed of this moment for as long as I could remember, and now it was finally real. I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of awe. The convent was everything I had imagined, a place of devotion, discipline, and love for God. There was something sacred in the stillness that surrounded us. Each day, we followed a strict schedule: early morning prayers, silent meals, and hours of study and reflection. It was as though every moment was dedicated to seeking God's will. The other novices were like sisters to me, each one coming from different walks of life, but all of us united by the same calling. I quickly formed close bonds with them, and together we learned to embrace the life we had chosen. We helped each other through the difficult times, shared in the joys of service, and supported one another as we navigated the strict rules of the convent. One of the first things I learned was the importance of community. It wasn't just about personal devotion anymore. It was about us, as a group, working together to serve God. Each of us had a unique role to play, and the shared mission gave everything a deeper meaning. We were not just individuals, we were part of something much bigger, something eternal. At first, the work felt easy. It was fulfilling to spend my days in prayer and contemplation, knowing that my life had meaning. The rhythms of the convent became my rhythm, and I was proud to be part of such a sacred place. Every day, the beauty of the rituals, the chanting of psalms, the ringing of bells, the stillness of the chapel reminded me of the purity of my intentions. The Mother Superior, Sister Agnes, was a guiding figure for us all. She was kind, approachable, and always seemed to know exactly what to say when we were struggling. She had a warmth about her that made me feel safe and understood. She would often sit with us, offering words of wisdom and encouragement. There was something deeply nurturing about her, and I quickly came to admire her leadership. In those early days, I saw her as a role model, someone who had walked the path before us and understood the sacrifices and rewards of a life dedicated to faith. Her presence was calming, like a reassuring hand on your shoulder when you felt uncertain. I often found myself seeking her guidance, trusting her wisdom above all else. She spoke of the importance of humility, of surrendering our wills to God, and of the great responsibility we had as women of faith. Under her mentorship, I grew. I learned the depths of prayer, the beauty of service, and the power of quiet devotion. I felt like I was being shaped, molded into someone stronger, more faithful. It was a transformative time in my life. Sister Agnes would often remind us that we were not just here for our own salvation. We were here to serve others, to be the hands and feet of Christ in the world. Her words resonated deeply with me. I felt a sense of purpose, like never before. I was part of something greater than myself. We were all working toward a shared goal, to live in the service of others, and to honor God with every action, no matter how small. The first few months passed in a blur. Each day felt like a step closer to something pure, something holy. I reveled in the quiet moments of prayer, in the feeling of connection with the other sisters, and in the certainty that I was exactly where I was meant to be. The discipline of convent life, at first, felt like a gift, a chance to truly dedicate myself to God. The long hours of prayer and study seemed like opportunities for growth, not burdens. I embraced the structure, the silence, the rules. They felt like the foundation I needed to build my life on. But as I settled in, I started to notice something I hadn't before. It was subtle at first, just a flicker of doubt, a fleeting thought that passed through my mind and was quickly dismissed. I saw how the older sisters, the ones who had been there the longest, moved with a certain air about them. There was something distant in their expressions, something guarded that I couldn't place. It wasn't until later that I realized these small details weren't as inconspicuous as I had once thought. Still, in those early days, I tried not to focus on those moments. There was too much to be grateful for, too much beauty in the daily rhythm of prayer and reflection. I trusted the process and believed wholeheartedly that I was meant to be there, in that sacred place, working toward a higher calling. As time passed, I grew more comfortable in my role. I felt confident in my decision to be there, and I began to believe that I was becoming the person I had always wanted to be. My faith felt stronger, my purpose clearer. And yet, in the back of my mind, there was a nagging sense of unease, something I couldn't quite understand, something that stayed just out of reach. For now, though, I pushed it aside. I had a mission, a purpose. I was living the life I had dreamed of since I was a child. I was a nun, devoted to God, to prayer, and to service, and I was ready to continue on this sacred path, whatever it might bring. But the cracks I would later come to recognize were beginning to form, and they would change everything. Yet, for now, I was content in my devotion, still believing that the world of the convent held only peace, love, and the presence of God. In the beginning, I had thought everything was perfect. The prayers, the rituals, the sense of community, it all seemed to fit together like a beautiful mosaic. But, over time, I began to notice things that I hadn't seen before. Small things at first, fleeting moments that I brushed off as part of the discipline. But those moments, those small signs, began to add up, and the weight of them was hard to ignore. The first crack I noticed was the strictness with which we were expected to adhere to the rules. At first, it felt comforting, like the structure was keeping us safe, guiding us toward a higher purpose. But slowly, I began to see the limits it placed on our personal thoughts and freedoms. Questions were discouraged, and there was little room for discussion. If we asked too many questions about why things were done a certain way, we were met with silence, or worse, disapproval. The convent had its rules, and those rules were not to be questioned. It didn't matter if something didn't make sense, or if we were struggling to understand. We were expected to obey, to follow the path laid out for us without hesitation or doubt. At first, I thought it was just part of the life I had chosen. After all, devotion required sacrifice, didn't it? But as time went on, I started to feel the pressure of that silence, the weight of it pressing down on my spirit. What struck me next was the way individuality was suppressed. We were all meant to blend together, to become one collective body of faith. Our identities, our personal preferences, our desires, those things were meant to fade away in the face of our commitment to the church. The habits we wore, the silence we observed, the meals we ate, they were all the same, and we were told that was how it should be. We were not to stand out. We were not to assert ourselves. We were meant to disappear into the group, into the mission. There was a strange comfort in that at first. It felt like I was truly surrendering myself to God's will. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. It wasn't just a matter of giving up things for the sake of faith. It felt like I was being erased. It was as if my unique qualities, my thoughts, and even my voice were not welcome. We were all expected to be the same. And then came the punishments. I had heard whispers of them before, but I had never seen them myself. I thought the stories of discipline were exaggerated, just rumors that were part of the atmosphere of the convent. But one evening, I witnessed it firsthand. A sister, one of the newer novices, had been caught breaking a small rule, something as simple as talking during a designated prayer time. It was a minor mistake, one that any of us could have made, but the reaction was anything but minor. Sister Agnes, the Mother Superior, called the young sister into her office, and I could hear the harshness in her voice even from the hallway. The young sister came out of the office a few minutes later, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. She walked straight to her room without saying a word, her shoulders hunched. I heard later that she had been given a series of chores as punishment, tasks that were far more strenuous than usual, and that she was expected to do them without any rest. It wasn't just physical labor, it was emotional punishment. The silence, the disapproval, the isolation, all of it was designed to break the spirit. I had never seen anything like it, and the image of that young sister walking away from the office stayed with me for days. It made me question everything I had believed about the convent. As time went on, I began to hear more stories of harsh treatment, not just of novices, but of older sisters as well. There were punishments for disobedience, yes, but there was also a sense of fear that seemed to permeate everything. The sisters who had been there the longest moved with a caution in their steps, as if they were constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. The way they spoke to one another, the way they kept their heads down, it was as though they had been conditioned to fear the consequences of even the slightest mistake. But it wasn't just the punishments that troubled me. As I spent more time in the convent, I began to overhear whispers, fragments of conversations that made my blood run cold. The Mother Superior, the leaders of the convent, were involved in financial dealings that didn't sit right with me. I wasn't close enough to know all the details, but I heard enough to understand that there was something deeply wrong. The convent, a place that was supposed to be dedicated to humility and service, was involved in practices that were the complete opposite. I heard rumours of large sums of money being funneled into the convent's coffers, money that was supposed to go toward charity and supporting the poor. Instead, it was being used for personal luxuries, for things that had nothing to do with our mission. The thought of it made me sick to my stomach. How could the church, a place of faith and service, allow such corruption? At first, I couldn't bring myself to believe it. I tried to dismiss the whispers as mere gossip. Rumours spun by those who didn't understand the complexities of convent life. But the more I overheard, the more I couldn't ignore it. There were too many inconsistencies, too many contradictions in what we were being told, and what was actually happening behind the scenes. The veil that had once seemed so pure and sacred now began to feel thin, like it could tear at any moment. The love and devotion I had felt toward this place started to fade, replaced by a growing unease. I had come here to find God, to serve a higher purpose, but now I found myself questioning everything, questioning the very foundation of what I had believed in. I could feel the weight of the truth pressing down on me. Something was terribly wrong, and I could no longer turn a blind eye to it. But as much as I wanted to know the truth, I also feared what would happen if I uncovered more than I was ready to face. I had joined the convent seeking peace and purpose, but now I found myself on the edge of something much darker, and I didn't know how much longer I could pretend that everything was as it seemed. It was a rainy afternoon when everything changed. The storm outside raged against the windows, its howling winds matching the turmoil that had taken root inside me. The weight of the truth I had been avoiding pressed harder, suffocating me with each passing day. I had tried to push it aside, to focus on my duties and my prayers, but it was impossible now. The cracks in the convent's foundation had deepened, and I could no longer ignore them. It was during my regular duties in the convent's library when I stumbled upon something I shouldn't have seen. I had been tasked with sorting through old records, papers that were tucked away in a dusty corner of the library. It was supposed to be a simple task, something I had done dozens of times before, but this time, something caught my eye. A folder, out of place, shoved beneath other documents. Curiosity stirred within me, and I couldn't resist. I pulled it out and opened it, my hands trembling. Inside were letters, detailed accounts, and official-looking papers that made my heart race as I read them. The more I read, the more my stomach twisted. The documents revealed a pattern, a history of abuse, manipulation, and corruption that went beyond anything I had imagined. There were confessions, written statements from sisters who had been silenced, coerced into compliance by threats and pressure. There were financial records showing the misappropriation of funds, money that was meant to help the poor, used instead for luxuries and personal gain. There were accounts of emotional and physical abuse, of sisters being punished for minor infractions, their spirits broken under the weight of a system that preyed on their devotion. As I read, a cold sense of dread washed over me. This wasn't just a few isolated incidents. It was a systematic, deeply ingrained culture of control, secrecy, and exploitation. The convent, the place I had once believed to be a sanctuary, was built on a lie. I felt my world crumbling around me. How could I have been so blind? How had I not seen the signs before? Every prayer, every moment of devotion now felt tainted. The very place I had trusted, the people I had revered, were all part of something far darker than I could have imagined. The guilt washed over me in waves. I had pledged my life to this place, to this mission. I had given everything to serve God through the convent, through the vows I had taken. And yet, here I was, holding evidence of the very corruption I had sworn to fight against. I couldn't stay silent. I couldn't turn my back on the truth. But confronting the Mother Superior, the very person who had guided me, who had been a source of comfort in my early days, felt impossible. What would she say? How would she react? Would she even listen? I had no idea, but I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. With trembling hands, I made my way to the Mother Superior's office. The folder clutched tightly in my arms. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the weight of the evidence pressing against me like a physical force. I knocked on her door, my voice barely audible as I asked for permission to speak. When Sister Agnes called me in, I stepped into the room, my mind racing. The office was dimly lit, the only light coming from the small window above the desk. Sister Agnes sat behind her large wooden desk, her expression unreadable as she looked up at me. I took a deep breath and placed the folder on her desk, my hands shaking. "Sister Agnes," I began, my voice faltering. I found something. I don't know what to make of it, but I can't ignore it." She glanced at the folder, but didn't immediately open it. Her gaze was sharp, studying me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "What is this about, Maria?" Her voice was calm, but there was a note of warning beneath it. I felt a lump form in my throat. "These documents, they contain confessions, evidence of what's been happening here, abuses, corruption, manipulation." I paused, my breath coming in short bursts. "I don't understand how this could happen, how it could be hidden, but it's all here." Sister Agnes's face tightened, her eyes narrowing. She didn't reach for the folder. Instead, she stood, walking around the desk to stand in front of me. "Maria," she said, her voice cool and composed. "You must be mistaken. There's nothing of the sort here. You're letting your emotions cloud your judgment." I shook my head, the words catching in my throat. "No, I've seen the evidence. It's all right there." Sister Agnes stepped closer, her eyes cold now. "You've been here for a while, Maria. You know how things work. You know what is expected of you. This is not the place for doubt. You've been given a responsibility, a role. And this is an attempt to undermine everything we stand for." Her words were like a slap to my face. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But the truth must come out. These women, these sisters, they've been hurt. They need help. She smiled, but it was not a kind smile. "Maria, you've always been so eager to please, so eager to follow the rules, but sometimes the rules aren't enough. Sometimes there are greater forces at work." She took a step back, her voice becoming sharp. "You would be wise to forget about this. If you continue down this path, you will find yourself questioning everything. Your faith, your vows, your purpose here. Is that what you want? The weight of her words crushed me. I felt my resolve faltering, the doubt creeping in. Was I making a mistake? Was I truly prepared to challenge everything I had known, everything I had given my life to? Torn between my vows and my conscience, I felt lost. The guilt began to eat away at me, and for a moment I wondered if I was being foolish. But deep down, I knew the truth couldn't be ignored. The damage was already done, and I couldn't erase the reality that now stared me in the face. The room felt suffocating, the walls closing in around me as I stood there, struggling to make sense of it all. I had hoped for answers, for understanding, but all I received was hostility and gaslighting. It was as if the world I had trusted had shifted beneath my feet, and I was left standing in the ruins. I left the office that day with more questions than answers. The path ahead seemed unclear, and the guilt of my discovery weighed heavily on me. But deep down, I knew there was no turning back. I had uncovered the truth, and it would change everything. The weight of what I had discovered settled heavily on my chest, and every breath felt like it was pulling me deeper into a chasm I couldn't escape. After the confrontation with Sister Agnes, I couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in on me. It was as though the convent, once a place of solace and purpose, had become a prison. The more I tried to find the truth, the more I felt the pressure to silence myself. It was as if my entire existence had become a battle between the vows I had taken and the undeniable truth that screamed inside me. That night, after a long day of questions and confusion, I found myself in my small, sparse room, the weight of everything too much to bear. The shadows from the flickering candle seemed to stretch endlessly across the walls, and I felt an overwhelming sense of isolation. I hadn't spoken to anyone about what I had uncovered, and every glance from the other sisters felt like an unspoken accusation. I didn't know whom I could trust anymore, or if there was even anyone who would understand. I kneeled beside my bed, my hands clasped tightly together, and whispered a prayer. It was a desperate plea for guidance, for clarity, for some sign that I wasn't alone in this. I had devoted my life to God, to this calling. But now everything seemed so unclear. The very foundation of my faith was crumbling beneath me, and I didn't know what to do. "Lord," I whispered through a dry throat, my voice shaky, "please show me the way. Please give me the strength to understand what I must do. I can't carry this burden alone. I need your guidance." I felt nothing but the silence of the room, the stillness pressing in on me, making it feel like the very air was thick with tension. For what seemed like hours, I remained there, waiting for a sign, waiting for something to shift. But nothing came. The silence was deafening, and I began to wonder if I had been abandoned, if my prayers had fallen on deaf ears. But then, as the night deepened, something began to change. It started with a subtle warmth, a sensation that spread slowly from my chest, like the soft touch of sunlight on a cold morning. I didn't know what to make of it at first, but the longer I stayed there, the more it grew. It was as if something unseen was enveloping me, filling me with peace, and yet with a deep sense of purpose. Then I felt it. A presence that filled the room, that filled every inch of my being. It wasn't a physical presence, not in the way we feel the warmth of another person standing beside us. It was something deeper, something far more powerful and overwhelming. I didn't see anything, but I felt a wave of love, of infinite compassion and understanding wash over me. It was as though God himself had entered the room, and in that moment, I knew beyond any doubt that I was not alone. My heart raced as I felt a presence beside me, and without words, I understood. This was not just a feeling, it was a divine encounter. I couldn't explain it, but I knew with every fiber of my being that it was real. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't losing my mind. This was God, reaching out to me, comforting me, and giving me strength when I had none left. And then, in that stillness, a voice filled my heart. It was not a voice I heard with my ears, but one I felt deep within me. "Speak the truth," the voice said, clear and steady. "You are not meant to hide. Your truth will set you free." Tears streamed down my face as I heard those words, each one resonating within me like a bell ringing through the silence. It was as if the veil had been lifted, and I could see clearly for the first time. All the doubts, all the fears, all the guilt that had been clouding my judgment suddenly fell away, replaced by a deep, unwavering sense of peace. "Speak the truth," the voice repeated, urging me, compelling me. "Do not be afraid. You are not alone." I felt a sense of overwhelming love, a love that surpassed any understanding I had ever known. It was a love that wasn't bound by rules, by traditions, or by institutions. It was a love that was free, pure, untainted, and unconditional. It was the kind of love I had been searching for my entire life, the kind of love that could heal all wounds and erase all doubts. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. I had to speak out. I had to expose the truth, no matter the cost. I had to free myself from the chains of fear and guilt that had bound me to this place. The pain and confusion that had tormented me for so long began to melt away, replaced by a newfound clarity. I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders, as though the burden of keeping this secret was being taken from me. The voice didn't say anything more, but I didn't need more. I knew what I had to do. I knew that the truth would set me free, not just for myself, but for all those who had been silenced, for all the sisters who had suffered in the name of obedience and faith. As I sat there, alone in my room, I made a vow to myself. I would not stay silent. I would not let fear hold me back any longer. I would speak the truth, and in doing so, I would find the freedom I had been longing for. It was then that I realized the decision I had been wrestling with for so long. I could no longer stay in the convent. This place, this life I had given everything for, was no longer where I belonged. The decision to leave was not easy, and the guilt still lingered in the back of my mind, but the clarity I had gained that night, the divine encounter, gave me the courage I needed. I knew I couldn't keep living a lie. I had to find my own path, one that was true to myself and to the calling that God had placed on my heart. I rose from my knees, my heart filled with a peace I had not known in months, perhaps years. The path ahead was uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure. I had been given the strength to walk it. The truth had been revealed to me, and now it was my turn to share it with the world. Leaving the convent wasn't easy. The night I decided to leave, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in my small room, the moonlight casting shadows over the walls. My heart was heavy with a mix of emotions: fear, guilt, excitement, and even relief. I had never imagined I would be in this position, standing at the edge of everything I had known, ready to step away from it all. But deep inside, I knew it was the only way forward. I knew the moment I walked out the door, I was breaking not just the rules of the convent, but everything I had built my life around. The vows I had taken, the life I had dedicated to God within those walls, all seemed to fade into the distance. They were not the truth I had come to understand anymore. With only a small bag packed with essentials, I left before dawn. The silence of the convent was almost oppressive as I stepped out into the cool night air. My footsteps felt heavy, but with each step there was a sense of freedom that grew stronger. I was doing this for me, for the woman I was meant to be, for the truth I had found. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. I had heard whispers from a few of the sisters about a group of evangelical Christians who were offering support to those who had left the convent or faced struggles within religious institutions. I didn't know much about them, but I remembered their message. They offered grace, healing, and a new way to connect with God. The journey was not easy. I had no money, no contacts, no direction. It was as though I had been stripped of everything I had known. I felt like a stranger in a world that had always been so familiar to me. But as the days passed, the uncertainty began to settle into a quiet hope. One afternoon, after several days of searching, I found myself at the doorstep of a small church. It was a humble building, tucked away on a quiet street. The warmth that greeted me as I stepped inside was unlike anything I had felt in so long. There was no judgment in the eyes that met mine, only curiosity and kindness. A woman named Ruth, the leader of the group, welcomed me with open arms. She didn't ask me where I came from or why I had left. She simply embraced me, and in that moment, I felt the love of God flow through her. It was different from what I had experienced before. There was no condition to it, no expectation. It was pure, unconditional love. Ruth and the others in the group listened to my story without interrupting. They didn't try to fix me or tell me what I had done was wrong. They just listened. And in that space of listening, I began to heal. I wasn't forced to defend my decisions or explain myself. I could simply be. Over the next few weeks, I spent time with Ruth and the others in the group, attending Bible studies, sharing meals, and praying together. It was a new experience for me, but in the best way possible. I learned about grace, not as a concept, but as a living, breathing thing. Grace wasn't something I had to earn or prove myself worthy of. It was given freely, without question, without judgment. The Bible studies opened my eyes to a different perspective of faith. I had always known the Bible, but now, through the eyes of those who welcomed me, I saw it in a new light. They didn't see the Bible as a set of rigid rules, but as a love letter from God, showing us the way to live with compassion, understanding, and love for all. I remember one night, sitting around a table with Ruth and a few others, when we read from the book of Romans. Ruth spoke about God's unconditional love and the power of forgiveness. Her words hit me deeply. They were like a balm for my soul, soothing the wounds that had been left by my time in the convent. God's love isn't something we have to earn, Ruth said, her voice soft but firm. It's something that's always there, ready for us to receive. All we have to do is accept it. Her words resonated with me more than I ever expected. They felt like a lifeline, like a way out of the darkness I had been living in for so long. As I continued to immerse myself in this new community, I began to understand what true faith was. It wasn't about following a set of rules or living in a way that kept me in fear of judgment. It was about living in love, accepting grace, and offering that same grace to others. I began to heal in ways I never imagined. The emotional wounds I had carried for so long started to fade, replaced by a sense of peace and understanding. I realized that my time in the convent, although painful, had been part of a larger journey, a journey that had led me to this moment of clarity. I still prayed, but now my prayers felt different. They were no longer prayers of guilt or shame. They were prayers of gratitude, of hope, and of trust in the God who had brought me here. I began to understand that my journey was not just about leaving the convent, but about finding my true self and my true faith. Each day was a step forward, a step into a new chapter of my life. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. I was no longer trapped in the lies I had once believed. I was free, and that freedom was more precious than anything I had ever known. I found strength in the support of the group, and together we began to explore what it meant to live in God's love and grace. The sense of community was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was a place where I was not judged for my past, but embraced for who I was and who I was becoming. Every day, I felt myself growing stronger, not just physically, but spiritually. I was learning how to love myself, to forgive myself, and to trust in God's plan for me. It was a journey that had just begun, but already I could feel the deep roots of faith taking hold in my heart. In the silence of my own thoughts, I often reflected on how far I had come. From the young woman who had entered the convent with dreams of devotion, to the woman sitting here now, surrounded by love and understanding. It was a long road, but it had led me to a place of peace. And for the first time in a long while, I felt truly alive. I didn't know where to begin. The weight of everything I had endured, everything I had seen, was almost too much to bear. Yet, despite the fear gnawing at my insides, I knew I had to speak out. My silence had kept me captive for so long, and now I had a voice. It was time to use it. I began by sharing my testimony in small gatherings, speaking to individuals who had reached out to me after hearing about my journey. These were people who had been through similar experiences, those who had suffered in silence, afraid of the repercussions of speaking out. I told them about the convent, about the manipulation, the lies, and the abuse that had happened behind those sacred walls. Every word that left my mouth felt like a weight lifted from my chest, but also like a door being opened to something unknown. The first time I spoke in front of a larger group was terrifying. I had spent weeks preparing, writing down my thoughts, rehearsing my words. I had to make sure I told my story clearly, without letting my emotions overwhelm me. I stood before a small congregation of evangelical Christians, the very group that had given me a new sense of belonging, and I took a deep breath. "My name is Maria Caldwell," I began, my voice trembling slightly, but gaining strength as I continued. I spent many years in a convent, believing I was serving God. But the truth is, I was serving a system that used faith to control and manipulate. As I spoke, I saw the faces of those listening. Some were shocked, others deeply moved. There was no denying the truth in my words. I had lived it, I had seen it, and I couldn't keep it hidden any longer. But even as I felt the weight of my own story pouring out, I was keenly aware of the risks. The church, the very institution I had devoted my life to, would not take kindly to what I was doing. The fear of backlash was overwhelming, but I could no longer be silent. Soon after my first public testimony, I began to receive messages, emails, letters, and phone calls, some from strangers, some from people I had known in the convent. Survivors of abuse, former sisters, and even a few priests who had witnessed the corruption all reached out. They thanked me for my courage, for finally bringing the truth to light. I wasn't alone anymore. One woman, a former novice who had left years before me, shared her own painful story. She spoke of the emotional abuse she had suffered under the same Mother Superior who had once seemed so kind to me. Her words echoed my own experiences. Her pain mirrored mine. And in that moment, I knew my decision to speak out was more important than I had ever imagined. However, with every message of support, there was also resistance. The backlash began almost immediately. I received threats, vicious letters, angry phone calls, and even anonymous messages warning me to stop. "You'll ruin your life," they said. "The church will never forgive you. You'll be ostracized." The fear that crept into my mind was real. The power of the church was vast, and they would stop at nothing to protect their image. But with every threat, I grew stronger. I couldn't let them silence me again. My story was not just mine to carry. It was the truth that needed to be heard. I remembered what Ruth had told me when I first joined the evangelical group. "The truth has power," she said. "No matter how hard it is, you have to speak it. Because when you do, it sets you and others free." Her words stayed with me as I continued to speak out. Every time I shared my testimony, I felt the power of those words becoming more real. The more I spoke, the more people came forward, sharing their own stories, their own pain. The silence that had once bound us all together was beginning to break. I wasn't alone in this anymore. I had a community of survivors, of brave souls who were willing to stand by me and share their own truth. We began meeting in secret, gathering in quiet places to support one another, to heal together. We formed a network, and our cause began to grow. It was no longer just about me. It was about all of us, all those who had been silenced, all those who had been mistreated, all those who had been used in the name of God. But the more we spoke out, the more the pressure mounted. We received threats not only from members of the church, but from people who wanted to protect the status quo. "You don't know what you're doing," they warned. "You're destroying the faith. You're destroying lives." The weight of their words almost broke me. At times, I felt as though the world was closing in around me, that I was fighting a battle I couldn't win. But then, I would remember the faces of the survivors, the people who had come forward, the ones who were finding their voices because of me. I couldn't stop. I couldn't go back to a life of silence and complicity. The truth was worth fighting for. Every time someone reached out to me, every time another survivor spoke their truth, I knew that I was doing the right thing. I began to travel, sharing my testimony at churches, community centers, and small gatherings. Each time I spoke, I met more people who had been hurt, more people who had been betrayed by the very institution they had trusted. Their stories were just like mine. We were all victims of the same system, and together we were beginning to reclaim our voices. The church, of course, didn't take kindly to my growing platform. I received letters from church officials demanding that I stop. They threatened legal action, claiming that I was defaming the institution. But with every threat, I stood my ground. I wasn't afraid anymore. I knew what I had to do, and I knew I was not alone in this fight. It wasn't just about exposing the abuses, it was about healing. It was about giving people the space to confront their own pain and find the freedom that had been stolen from them. I wasn't just a survivor. I was a witness to something much larger, something that needed to be addressed. And I would not rest until the truth was heard. As I continued to speak out, I saw hope grow in the eyes of the people I met. They weren't just listening to my story, they were listening to their own. And together, we were healing. Together, we were reclaiming the truth. The mission had begun. And I would not stop until every voice had been heard, until every story had been told. It was strange, standing before a crowd, knowing I was no longer that timid woman who had entered the convent with stars in her eyes. The person I was now, the person I had become, was shaped by years of pain, discovery, and growth. But more than anything, it was the love and grace I had found that had transformed me. I had learned that faith wasn't about blind submission to authority. It wasn't about following rules or traditions that hid the truth. Faith, true faith, was about love. It was about compassion. And most importantly, it was about the freedom to seek God in a way that was deeply personal, deeply meaningful. As I stood there in front of hundreds of people in a packed auditorium, I realized that my story was no longer just my own. It had become a message of hope, of healing, and of justice. And now it was my calling to share that message with the world. I had come a long way from the scared woman who had left the convent in fear. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of the threats, not of the church, not of what anyone thought of me. I had found my voice, and I would use it to advocate for the truth. Faith is not about what we are told to believe, I said to the crowd, my voice steady and sure. It's not about being a part of an institution that controls and manipulates. It's about our personal relationship with God, and that relationship should be one built on love, grace, and freedom. God's love isn't confined to a building, a doctrine, or a ritual. It is everywhere, in every moment, in every act of kindness. The faces in the audience were filled with rapt attention, many nodding in agreement, others wiping away tears. I had seen so much pain and heartache, but I also saw the glimmer of something more, a yearning for something real, something true. It wasn't just about what I had endured. It was about the people I was now speaking to, the lives I hoped to touch. Justice matters, I continued, but so does compassion. True Christian faith should be about caring for one another, lifting each other up, and holding each other accountable. Institutions may fail us, but our relationship with God is the one thing no one can take away from us. We must fight for truth, and we must fight for love. This is what I've learned through everything I've been through. As I spoke, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't known for so many years. There had been a time when I didn't understand why I had gone through all that pain. I couldn't comprehend why a place that was supposed to be sacred had become a prison. But now I saw it. My journey, my suffering, had all led me to this moment. It had led me to the truth, and it had led me to a deeper, more personal relationship with God. I took a moment to pause, letting my words settle in the air. The room was silent, filled with the energy of shared understanding. I had spent so many years trapped in guilt, in shame, in fear of what I would lose if I spoke the truth. But now, I saw that the real loss had been my silence. It had kept me chained to a false sense of loyalty. Speaking out had cost me so much, but it had given me so much more. It had given me my freedom, and it had given me the power to help others find theirs. Please, I urged the crowd, my heart swelling with emotion. Don't let fear stop you from seeking the truth. Don't let guilt or shame keep you silent. Seek God's love, not just in the walls of a church, but in the kindness we show to each other, in the justice we demand for the vulnerable, in the compassion we extend to those who are suffering. That is where God is. As I finished speaking, the room erupted in applause, but it wasn't the applause that filled my heart with joy. It was the faces, the people who stood there, not just listening, but absorbing. People who had been hurt, who had lost their way, but who now saw that there was a path forward, a path of healing, of love, and of justice. I had no idea what the future held. I didn't know how much further I could go, or how many more people I would reach, but one thing I knew for sure was that I was not alone. the love I had found, the truth I had embraced was with me always, and as long as I had that, I would keep going. So, I left that auditorium not with bitterness, not with anger, but with hope. My past had shaped me, but it would not define me. It was not about what I had lost. It was about what I had gained. A deeper understanding of God's love, a stronger sense of purpose, and a resolve to keep fighting for the truth. I had come through the darkness, and now I was walking in the light. And that light was for all of us who had been lost, who had been hurt, who had been silenced. There was hope for us all. And as I continued on my journey, I would spread that message, one story at a time. The journey wasn't over. It had only just begun.